All right, welcome to the Grill Podcast. I'm your host, John King. Today we're going to be talking, it's January 9th. We're going to go through a little bit of a fall recap of, what we saw from, I'm going to call it the markets, primarily on fertilizer and chemical, and then what we see coming here this spring, and talk about the tremendous amount of demand we saw this fall from the large weather window we had. And then we're going to really be finishing up. I'm going to bring Dan Bjorklund on, our grow agronomist. And we're going to talk a lot about what we're seeing in seed selection as we look to spring of 24, as well as talking a little bit about some of our acre edge products and how they fit in that system to help mitigate stress, and really our path to consistently looking at 80 bushel beans. How do we get to 250 bushel corn and really provide a ton of return on your guys' acres? So, that's really what we're looking like on the podcast today. And as always, we're going to lead into what I always call the meat and potatoes market update, looking at what's happening in the markets and driving what we're doing from a crop input side. So, the biggest thing, I think the first thing I'll start with is when you look back the past, call it 120 days, I guess, and I'm almost worn out from saying that, but I think we've had the last 4 months of nonstop work taking place in the fields, which is going to make this spring probably the easiest spring that I've seen, definitely since I've been at Landis, which is crazy to say because we've had some pretty nice, easy springs to go through. But, we've had one heck of a weather window to really take advantage of what's happening in the countryside now, between when we had a really nice harvest of Roundup, as well as, a huge dry fertilizer run, a huge ammonia run with those things. So, we look back and I look at the numbers at Landis, our overall increase in dry business, ammonia business this fall has been pretty significant. Talking to other industry players that they would reiterate the exact same thing. Everybody in ag retail and, which deal with the farmers, have had very, very robust demand. And a lot of it we feel like is not truly pulling all spring demand forward. It's just, we had a extremely well run, dry application rates were much higher than we anticipated them being, with yields surprising us on corn in a lot of areas. So when we look at overall on the entire portfolio of what happened this fall for fertilizer, the market had a very good run. Because of that, really looking at phosphates and potash, we had talked a lot about the upside that we saw in potash and phosphates this fall. That's going to carry into spring a little bit because inventories are so depleted. Retail inventories are depleted. Wholesale inventories are depleted. Manufacturing supplies are depleted. We're at a point right now where the phosphate industry is completely dry. We're dry at Landis. We got, we're trying to scratch and poke for every amount of product we can get to continue to spread with this excellent weather we've had. It's literally, it's January 5th as we're taping this, and we're going to release it on January 9th. We're still spraying dry today. Fall has not stopped on dry fertilizer, and it started basically September 9th when seed corn was coming off. So, just the amount of product that we've put down this fall has been purely insane. And I know between me and a lot of my coworkers, we're ready for a small break in the action to get after it this spring, so we can get regrouped with supply and manage our logistics a little bit better, because it's been a gauntlet for sure. So when you look at that, the phosphate inventories are completely depleted. I was fully anticipating those prices to reset further for spring application. They're not. They're quite frankly, they're just not going to reset to the degree I thought they would. They've come off maybe a little bit from the highs of fall, but when you look at the true supply situation domestically, there's no reason for them to go down. When we look out further past this spring application, when you look at March, April application, that's where I think a lot of the opportunity for the U.S. farmer is going to be again for prices to really reset. We've had the countervailing duties on phosphates be completely changed to now where Moroccan Phosphates, who's really the world leader in phosphate supply, are now only going to be duty. They went from 19% to 2%, I believe it was, or something like that. I mean, it was a drastic cut in their overall duty percentage. We're going to see those tons start coming to the United States that we haven't seen in a long time. That's going to allow us to really start looking at some opportunity to have excess supply of phosphates. But it won't be anything drastic, and it won't be anything sizable this spring. So that's something to look forward to. When I look at potash, as it relates to spring, potash is a very flat market. I would say inventories on potash were depleted, but they started off fairly high. Most of you all saw that with your initial price point on potash this fall as a very aggressive price point. I don't think we get back there for spring application, but you start adding up interest and carrying costs from applying it this fall to spring. It's going to be a very relative cost per acre for potash this spring as it would have been for if you would have put it down this fall and borrowed the money at 8% interest. So, overall, you're not missing out on anything. That just maybe a slight difference in phosphorus pricing. So, those are the big two I look to spring that I'd be aware of. When I look to next fall, just as I always like to kind of give some forecasting. I think overall input pricing year over year is going to be very similar. I don't see a whole lot of changes. I think the biggest thing as a U.S. farmer now today, you start looking out D24 crop futures, D25, which is, a scary thing to market this far ahead. You're going to have $150 to $200 an acre of input cost, variable input cost between dry fertilizer, nitrogen, and your crop protection products. For the life of me, I can't see any huge downswings in prices from what we saw this fall, but I don't see any upswings. I think prices are going to trade within a very relative band to what that was this past year. So you start looking at, your averages of anywhere from $140 to $170 an acre for P and K and ammonia. As we look to next, I know that's hard to think about. That would be the crop you're going to plant spring of 25. But I really don't see a whole lot changing globally right now with overall pricing trends and what we saw this year. Obviously the war in Ukraine it's still happening, it's still ongoing. Anything can happen there at any time. The conflict in Israel, anything can happen at any time and change those things, but they're all geopolitical things that can change the market. Fundamentally, when we look at the markets from a fertilizer supply point, not a grain economic standpoint, but from a fertilizer supply point, the market looks very balanced throughout I would call it the next calendar year, which is very advantageous for the U.S. farmer and overall input prices. The biggest watch out, obviously, is, when I look back to what we've done this fall and how much product we have put down, we feel heavy corn acres. Anytime you have a big fall like this, you get as much ammonia down as we did. You tend to believe that there's going to be a few more corn acres out there than what we originally initially thought. You go drive by any bean field, it feels like in the state of Iowa, and it's got scratched dirt on it, ready to go for ammonia. And there's a lot of corn on corn acres out there that have already got scratched dirt, ready to go to ammonia. So, those are the big things I would say as a watch out for the U.S., especially for our growers, is make sure you are working with our marketing team here on unsold bushels this year, as well as bushels for marketing for DEES of 24. It feels like corn, obviously there's some South American weather happening right now that is holding the corn market in there today. But, it just feels like in general, we're going to have a few more corn acres around here than we really planned. And that's just a pure function of how easy this fall was to get through from field work. Most of the farmers, again, listening, and I'm sure you're all smiling when I say this, when you can get out there on April 10th and you didn't have to work very hard from a field standpoint, trying to get your fields ready to go start planting corn, and you're pretty rejuvenated, refreshed, ready to go plant, usually tends you're going to put an extra 80 into corn, an extra 160 into corn. So those are some things I think is a watch out, especially as we look to not even so much spring inputs, but, really when we're looking at 25 inputs is, what are you doing for marketing forward? What are you thinking about for covering input costs? If you got acres that are going to go to corn, that you're going to have to spend some money on. Those are some things I would be thinking about a little bit. The nitrogen side of the market, the urea market's pretty flat. We've bottomed out here the last 60 days. I think we've definitely put a floor in the market that's going to be pretty unbreachable from an import side. We're probably only going higher from here. So, I think that's a good product to be looking at positioning yourself for, because we are way behind on import pace. We're not a competitive market globally today. So we're going to at some point have to pay up to attract some imports, and that's probably going to lead to higher prices in spring. The other one I would say is UAN. UAN market's kind of ebbed and flowed. It was really aggressive when they came out with summer fill. It got high due to, where ammonia went to and some kind of scares at EU gas situation that have really come off now. I think UAN is going to be at a point now where it's pretty well flat throughout the rest of the year, but there's virtually no downside on that until you get to side dress. I don't see a whole lot of competition coming there. When you look at retail price spreads, UAN is still a very competitive product priced versus ammonia. Today with where the ammonium price is, I can't say if I was looking at the other two, or if I was trying to choose between the two, I would be, jumping on ammonia versus UAN if I didn't have stuff bought. So, that just tells me that there's probably some more wholesale downside on ammonia. The problem with that is there's no, the U.S. producers have no incentive to decrease ammonia prices today because they have zero inventory. And when I say that is when you think about it, we were still running ammonia 2.5 weeks ago here in central Iowa. There is literally no incentive whatsoever for them to go take ammonia prices down until they absolutely have to. If for some reason they do not see any spring demand in season, that could happen. But really what we're setting ourselves up for is spring demand is probably going to be light on anhydrous, primarily because we just had such a huge fall. What this is going to do is set up for the people that haven't bought, that are looking at, again, corn next year or 25 crop. The system's going to be very full this summer. We're going to come into the next fall extremely full. The price point on fall gas next fall, from a fundamental supply standpoint, is going to be at a very advantageous price again. So, when I look at those things, that's really what the market's telling me right now. Is it's not so much a depiction of how cheap spring ammonia is going to get, because I don't think it's going to get a whole lot cheaper just because there's no reason for it to. It's more of demand's not going to be justified enough to completely empty the season this spring again. It's really going to help for when we look at those reset prices come next summer and next fall. With that too, I would say, when you're looking at it, the chemical pricing is out there. There's been a lot of it out there for the last 60 days. It's a very competitive market this year compared to last year with the overall pricing. You've got glyphosate, glufosinate, clethodim, bifenthrin, generic quilt, straight azoxy, your metallochlors, some of your acetochlor products. I mean, everything is down substantially from 2 years ago and even a year ago. There's a lot of dollars a lot of dollars per acre being brought back to the farm from overall chemical devaluation. So make sure that you're aware of it, understand where you're seeing that. One thing I would challenge everyone to, and I would say I've seen it a lot early on from what we've had sold prior to the end of the year. We're seeing a lot of growers take advantage of the lower priced environment on crop chemistry and using some of that money to go upgrade their overall nutritional program. So what do I mean by that? They're able to take, if they're cutting $10 an acre out of their program from last year, or $15 an acre out of their program from last year, they're taking half that money and reinvesting it with a crop lift like that we're selling here at Landis in the Acre Edge portfolio side. For me, that's a great way to get to what we're looking at with 80 bushel soybean yields, 250 bushel consistent corn yields. We're seeing a lot of that, and I think that's a great way to spend those funds on products that serve a value from a nutritional standpoint or providing superior weed control. Even with the drastic cut in overall prices, especially in the generic market, we're still seeing some people continue to look at the value-added branded side on especially on the bean products to make sure that they're going to really knock down water hemp on that. And I think that's a great idea as we look forward to this year to manage weed control and provide solutions on the farm. So, with that's my big roundup right now, my podium speech. Again, just to recap it, when we're looking to spring fertilizer prices, we have them out today. I think they're overall going to be fairly flat through the rest of the spring. I don't see a whole lot of downside from where we're priced at today, unless it would be, if it is anything, it's going to be very moderately. We're not changing dollars per acre by $5 to $10 an acre cost situations. It's $1 or $2 if it really were to come down. So, really good opportunity there for people that haven't booked inputs. Look at getting that locked in. Look at getting your plan together. We're going to have the opportunity, albeit we miss some snow next week, to really be able to go out and continue to spread dry fertilizer and get everybody ready for spring to go out and have a successful planting season. And then with that as well, continue to work with your Landis agronomist or your Landis account lead, whether it's an account lead locally, our grow agronomy specialist, or a strategic account lead on those chemical programs. There's a ton of opportunity there to really put yourself in a great cost position with a phenomenal weed program, and also look at some value-added products that can provide nutritional value and improve overall yields. So with that, we're going to take a small break. I'm going to bring Dan up here, and we're going to get into seed selection for 24. All right, as always, for one of my favorite parts of the podcast, we got my man Dan Bjorklund, our grow agronomist, with us here again today. We're going to do a little bit of recapping and primarily talking about seed selection and how that really what we saw in 23 from the stressful environment, and then looking toward 24. What should growers be really ready to be looking for, and then with all your detective work you did this summer, and one thing I would really challenge everybody listening. Dan's got a little bit of a series that he's going out in the countryside and talking a lot about soybean management, especially high yield soybean management. Make sure you get to those meetings. They're going to be a great resource for you and your operation for 24. So Dan, give us the low down and dirty on 24 seed selection.
Well, first, let's talk soybeans first.
Okay.
Looking at 2023, man, it was stressful.
Yes.
And the way that I like to phrase this is that each field has a field stress load. It's not one stress, like as sudden death syndrome, or sometimes even two stresses like soybean cyst end. It's a combination of 3 or 4. And if you can figure out a way to identify what they are, and that's why we did the detective work, and then figure out a way to eliminate those stresses, that's how you get yields up towards 80 bushels. That's basically our theme. And a key part is variety selection, because most of the varieties that we have out there have different levels of resistance or tolerance to stresses like soybean cyst nematode, white mold, sudden death syndrome. And so first of all, we got to identify on a field-by-field basis. And guys, the only way you can do that is work with your Landis account leads. They know your fields and working with you. So take each field, and this year, look at what yields did I get, and what probably contributed to maybe where I wanted to go, and we had that yield gap of missing that out, because we've got some great opportunities not only for variety selection, but then we've got some acreage products that we can go on top of that and help mitigate stress. And that was one of the things that we saw. So there's so much to talk about, but when I look at soybeans and when I look at variety selection, the big one this year was soybean cyst nematode, right? So I want to look at a variety that's got good resistance. And what we're seeing right now is the peaking source of resistance is just holding up and held up in plot data and field trials much better than the old resistance that we've used for 30 years called PA 8878.
So when you're looking at those peaking varieties, and that's, it's funny because not only I almost think you started the trend, because now, whether I've talked to other dealers that sell Pioneer, that sell other different kind of varieties, a lot of people all of a sudden are really pushing their growers that way. I know, even on our family farm, we still plant some Pioneer seed corn and beans, and believe it or not, that's their key beans this year, are those peaking beans. So when you look at the Brevant lineup, where that's a lot of the different varieties that we're also looking at. So if you had to pick 3 varieties, so give me your key 3 varieties that I would call in Central Iowa people need to be looking at.
Brevant 202, which is a 2-1 maturity, has been great the last 2 years in the stress. And as we saw cysts starting to build, Brevant 243, which is a 2-4, and Brevant 272, which we identified last year.
Yes.
That hits really 3 key maturity zones. And all 3 of those did fantastic. There was also a Stein, 21E72, that we've shown actually some of the results of some field trials where it was like green strip through the field.
Okay, yeah.
And 10 bushels better than the one
right next to it.
Right next to it. I'd put those 4.
Okay.
Are the ones that come to mind. There are more and more varieties becoming available, because what has happened is that as we went to enlist and as we went to extend, as we went from the old Roundup Ready 2 beans to these new beans, what the companies had to do is they had to get that genetics incorporated with peaking in it, and it just takes a little while.
Right.
And you're getting that now. So I'd say from now on, we're going to have newer varieties every year. But those that we just talked about really have performed.
And I think the 2.4 and the 2.7 have been around even before last year.
Yes.
And, we've seen pretty consistent production levels out of those beans, especially in the areas where, it seems like kind of that, you're from Fort Dodge, that whole area around there that's really been hit hard with that. We've seen a lot of, I would say, an excessive amount of success in those areas. I think Atlantis, our primary brands we're going to carry is Brevant soybeans, Zetavo soybeans, Stein, and NK. Those are all 4 companies are going to offer a lot of really good varieties for sure, and make sure that you're working with your local account lead on what we do have to offer, and then as well as, obviously, everybody's got the ability to get a hold of Dan. There's one thing that I know about Dan. He loves talking about soybean varieties, genetics, the opportunity, and that's why he's going around the countryside this month and really talking about how do we manage beans more like we're managing corn. How do we shoot for 80 to 100 bushel beans? And I think that's something, we need to make beans fun to grow again.
We do. And every year we try to give some predictions, and not that we're trying to throw red flags necessarily, but we're looking at what we saw last year, and we're trying to say, okay, this might be a watch out. On soybeans, I'm going to do that right now. This is the first time we talked about it. Might mention at some of these meetings that you talked about that we're having on soybeans, but we have used the same source of resistance to a root fungus called Phytophthora root rot for about 30 years. And I noticed that, and it was a dry year, and that usually is a fungus that's in a wet year, but started seeing a little bit of that creeping in. So I think that is a disease. When it rains again, John, and it's going to rain again.
It will rain again.
We're going to get 25, 30 inches of rain. That's also something that we're going to need to look at variety, resistance, and tolerance. And again, account leads can help with that. We have used the RPS1K, and I don't like to throw all these numbers out.
They're on the tech sheets, though.
It is. There are some other genes that are out there that with Phytophthora you really get 2 ways to measure it. You get the specific gene, and then they have a little column called field tolerance, and that means that when you were out there, the beans either got it or they didn't, or how well they tolerated it. I would look at both levels, guys. You got your specific resistance, but the field tolerance is going to be important. So I throw that one out. We'll be talking about that next summer.
Seed treatment is another maybe way to manage it. So looking at our Seed Enhanced brand of seed treatments, which, really when you're looking at anything, that's going to be a fungicide type of application. So in all of our seed treatments, you're going to be able to get good action on that as well.
And I really believe that I would go with the Enhanced brand for that, because you're gonna pick up several fungal diseases, not only Phytophthora, but you're gonna pick up Rhizoctonia, which we're not going to go in depth on it. That's for the soybean meeting.
Right.
We'll do that. But that's how you're going to protect yourself. And we start getting, we get rain this spring, we start getting what has happened before. That's going to make it more and more important on the seed treatment that you choose to use.
No, I think that's key. And I think it's important. And I think it's an important thing we continue to talk about. How do we manage beans differently? Everybody is very aware of this scenario with renewable diesel and what that looks like for bean oil. We've got a bunch of demand coming to Iowa for beans, and the growers in Iowa are going to be it's not that they're going to be called on to grow more beans. They're going to be called on to be growing more beans on the same amount of acres that they have today. Right? It's not like we're adding acres to go put beans on. We have to increase yield.
So we need 80 bushel beans.
We need 80 bushel beans to justify.
I talked to 2 growers that I know pretty well in the area, and just talked to one this morning, and they were over by Hampton in a drier area and had bean yields going in the 70s, mid 70s. Mm-hmm. And it was variety selection that did that. Also, In some cases, it was corn on corn that went to beans.
Yes.
Talked to another grower in the Boone area that had 3 fields that went 80 with corn on corn switched over. How do we make rotated acres, when you go to beans and rotated acres, where it's only 1 year corn, how do we make that seem like 5 years of corn? I think that's where variety selection comes into play to reduce stress. Acreage product.
Yep.
That's how we're going to do it, because not everybody, we're not going to get enough acres that have been continuous corn for 5 to 10 years and switch to beans and get there. We can do it with rotated acres by having a comprehensive system approach. And we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, and I think that's the value with what we're doing with Acre Edge is it's really looking at we're looking at the bean acre and saying, all right, in each of these segments, how are we looking at expanding yield or minimizing yield loss, right? And it really is a systems approach to looking at that. And the exciting thing is again, being on year one, it's every year we're going to get a little bit better with what we know, how we're manufacturing the products, how we're placing them, and that's what's going to create a lot of fun. And you pair that up with a premium genetic recommendation. I mean, all things are good from there. So, well, okay. So Dan, we covered beans.
All right.
Any more you got on beans?
Nope.
Take me through corn.
Okay. Corn. It's still about tar spot.
Yep.
And we had more tar spot yield damage in the southern part of the state where we had more rain in areas this year. Whereas, 2 years ago it was northeast Iowa. The thing is, we've got the inoculum in all 99 counties.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes me concerned about tar spot is the fact that when you get the right environment with more rainfall and the temperatures that really favor that development, you can take corn out in 21 days. So you get it in the first part of August, and we haven't had a fungicide treatment. You get to the end of, and we saw that 2 years ago, and we saw 50 bushel differences, John, with guys who had not gone and used a fungicide. So the first thing that you do with tar spot selection is pick a hybrid that's got a good tolerance. And there are differences. The last 2 years, we've seen dramatic differences. We've had videos on it. We've shown visually what that looks like. The second thing is then protect it with really good, solid fungicide program. And why I like the variety tolerance situation tied into that is that it buys you more time. If you've got your favorite racehorse superstar, but it gets it early and very intense, we may not have the time to get all those acres covered. So we need that balanced approach. But tar spot still is number one stress factor for 2024.
And I think the biggest thing is, we actually had some really good plot data come out of Farnville on our corn and corn plot with overall fungicide performance. One thing I can tell you is fungicide pays.
Oh, yeah.
There's no doubt about it. Literally, you should be on every acre every year.
Yep.
We had almost 20 bushel increase over the check on Valtima, and really when we talk about that, that's not one check in the field. That's I think it was 65 acres trial with that we droned it all on, but it was replicated all the way across the field. And, we also did some with different hybrids in there, the overall hybrid response to that as well. So, I mean, it was a very, complicated plot that produced a lot of good information. But one thing we can tell you is there's no doubt that we actually had a biofungicide in there that even showed 10 bushel yield. So, I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that I think, as we look to the market, prices again on crop protection products, I would say the fungicide market's up slightly. I mean, it's a lot less than I even thought it was going to be for branded premium products. When you look at like a generic quilt or something like that, in my opinion, it basically feels like it's free today.
Right.
It's extremely cheap. So, you look at some of these different markets and the ability to price products relative in them, there's a lot of opportunity for the farmer to get crop health out there. And I think that's the key.
John, something that Scott Ehrenhortz covered yesterday in our first meeting when we were talking, it was soybean management. We got into a little bit of corn because we were talking about our new crop power product on Acre Edge. And there was a field where the product was used and an untreated check, and you could see the difference in the tar spot development. And then the yield followed through with that. When I'm thinking about the system approach, when you're looking at corn, so we're looking at a hybrid selection, we're looking at the fungicide. the thing about these products that we're bringing on to the acre edge is it's almost like you're getting this immune boost to that plant. Sort of like we've got a lot of flu going around, we got a lot of things going around. And if your immune system is at its peak shape, you have a better chance to fight that off and not get hit as hard. I think that's one of the benefits that we're seeing with some of these new products, because it was very, very visually different. I know it was just one field, but pretty amazing when you see that.
Well, okay, I'm going to use this analogy. We were just talking about this before we started the podcast, but my family we've been going through the flu bug, and my wife got it. And she went and got an IV from one of these places now that do that, at their own little store. When I think about like crop lift and how it affects the the plant from a stress mitigation standpoint, right. It's just like it's like us going to the doctor to get an IV. What do they put in there? Multivitamins, minerals, nutrients, maybe some prescription medicine, right? So like we do it as humans, we do it with animals all the time, right? We get sick animals. First thing we want to do is treat them and get them healthy. I think when we look at crop lift specifically, or our crop power technology, it's kind of like getting an IV or a Molotov cocktail to get you really going and making sure that your immune system is staying clean and that your energy level is there to fight off different things. And I think that's a great way of putting it in very relatable on what we're doing with a lot of the acre edge stuff. We have to think about it again in a systems approach of crop health. And when people think about crop health, you have to think about it almost like your own health or your animal health. You don't want a bad day for that crop.
What was interesting yesterday when we were talking about crop lift, a couple of different times in the meeting, people ask, well, how is this compared to like a pivot bio?
Yeah.
And what it made me think is that, okay, we all know that there's this big biological market, and we've had podcasts before talking about how it's the wild, wild west. We need to make sure that we explain to people that crop power, crop lift is a microbial byproduct.
Correct.
It's not the microbes that are either, the live microbes, and everybody that's watching this has used biologicals because soybeans have used a biological inoculant. But the problem with that inoculant was that we were always concerned, how do we keep it alive long enough and it's the same thing. What I like about using crop power and crop lift is that the shelf life is endless.
Correct.
Because you get the benefit of what the microbial activity was, but it's the extract from it.
Correct.
It's a chemical, a stable chemical that people are used to, that you can actually use with your post products. And to me, we're going to try to explain that to make sure people, because it's such a confusing market.
It is very
live biologicals. You've got the biological stimulants, the extracts, and then you've got another guy ask about plant growth regulators. Totally different. Looking at that market. So it's on us, and that's why we want people to come to our meetings, because we will go in depth and actually explain.
We want to continue to educate with what we're doing, and I think about it all the time. Is there's just the biological market continues to grow because it's so fast. It's a low barrier of entry. There's a lot of people that are really trying to get into it. You got a lot of mainstream companies. Nobody would have thought 10 years ago that Mosaic company would be in the biological market. Maybe even Corteva, So, you have these companies that are entering it because there's a huge amount of value to their company, to their growers, to their products they're already selling. So,
well, John, look at the yield. We did the Farmville research and very positive results, ROI results that were positive. And then we had people that were using the products and they were EXP compounds. They weren't even named yet. And we had positive results. On corn, up to 14 bushels on every single time that we did this. On soybeans, we had a lot of 5 to 7 bushel results. And it costs less than half a bushel for one application. When you're looking at soybeans. So when you're looking at stress mitigation, I mean, this really is.
It's like an insurance policy.
It really is.
It's an insurance policy, but really what it is, it's your daily multivitamin. It's a way to provide consistent crop health to your crop. So
so we talked about variety and hybrid selection, and that'll always be the first case, and then we'll build that system up to using these newer products like crop lift, and we are going to get it's going to be fun to see this over the next few years of how we see more and more yields approaching field average consistently of 80 bushels, and it doesn't have to be after 5 or 6 years of corn on corn.
Right.
We can do it in a rotational.
We can create it every year.
Yep.
Okay, to finish this out, 2 hybrids that you like for this year on corn.
I really like, on the Brevant side, I like 6Y18.
Yep.
We saw it 2 years ago because of
Tar
spot tolerance.
Very consistent product.
Just a fantastic product. And I also like 13K20,
Yep.
which is the 1-3. And I'm going to tell you that my nature is such, this summer will be my 45th year out here looking at fields and being an agronomist. The reason I picked those 2 hybrids is because I remember in my first years back in the 80s going with just strictly racehorses, because whatever won in the plots, and then having a different year come in, and then I have to walk out in the field when that corn is flat,
falling over.
I really got tired of getting chewed out with that. The nice thing about those 2 products is that in the years where you get over 250, they can get to those levels, but they got a nice offensive, defensive combination. So we've got some racehorses in there, and there's some products that we had a 1-4 this year that just was dominant. I would include those, but I include it in a portfolio combination of offense and defense.
No, I love that. And I know exactly what you're talking about because we're planting some of it on our family farm, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out. But, as always, Dan, I love having you on the podcast and love the leadership you provide, especially around the soybean message. So for those of you locally that are listening, make sure you ask your local account lead, your relationship specialist about when these meetings are happening. There's a ton of good information. And then we'll probably look sometime maybe around February to provide something digitally as well, maybe some voiceover of the presentation that Dan's providing as well, because it's a lot of good stuff to look at, and you've got a ton of good research data from Iowa State on the stuff that they've done. So, really what we're talking about is not out of school with what our major universities are finding as well. So, those are great, impactful things. And, the biggest thing we look at Landis is, not only are we an agronomy company, we want to provide you agronomy inputs, solutions for your farm, but we're a great grain company. And we want to make sure whether you're planting our hybrids or somebody else's, we want to make sure that you're producing as many bushels as possible to bring into the elevator in fall or put in your bins at home and create a great opportunity for yourself. So with that, as always, appreciate you coming on, Dan. And for all those of you listening, thank you again for always listening to the podcast.